Be the first to know what's new on TJC. Breaking news, award-winning movies, exciting documentaries, and original series. Sign up for our free bi-weekly email program guide at tjctv.com.
Welcome to the 25th episode of The Salon, taped on location before a live audience at the JCC in Manhattan. Coming up, is the bar and Bat Mitzvah model broken? What's a breadwinner, Mom? Is Angelina Jolie the key to breast cancer prevention? And can rape jokes be funny? It's coming up right now on the 25th episode of The Salon. And now our hosts, Jane Eisner and Rachel Sklar.
Hello, I'm Jane Eisner, editor of The Forward and Forward.com.
And I'm Rachel Sklar, founder of Change the Ratio and TheLi.st.
And as we've had the pleasure of doing for now 25 episodes, we welcome you to the Jewish channel's Salon.
We had not seen that video before. That was delightful, and that really struck home one of the reasons that we love doing this show. We have such an amazing and eclectic group of smart, funny, badass women, they can edit that out if I need to, who come and sit with us and talk about things that matter to Jews, to women, and to Jewish women.
And I can't believe that we've done this for so many years now and are continuing to.
Through so many hairstyles.
So it is my pleasure to welcome Judith Shulevitz, who is the science editor of The New Republic and the writer of The Sabbath World. Rabbi Joy Levitt, who is the director of the JCC Manhattan, our wonderful host tonight, and the founder of the Jewish Journey Project. And Hanna Rosin, senior editor of The Atlantic, author of The End of Men, and new to the Salon.
All right, let's get started.
You bet. Well, we have a number of wonderful topics to discuss tonight. I think the first thing we're going to do is look at something that many of us bemoan, but we're going to talk about it in a new way. For years, it seems, there's been so much complaint about how much money and extravagance goes to simchas, to paying for bar and bat mitzvah parties. And yet, Joy, you have been involved in the Jewish Journeys Project, which is a wonderful way of reimagining after-school Jewish education. You deal with teenagers all the time. You've had a couple yourself. And I know you have some really interesting ideas about perhaps what's really wrong with how we think about bar and bat mitzvahs.
Well, I think, what's really right is that most parents feel amazingly wonderful at the morning of their child's bar and bat mitzvah. And I suspect most kids do as well. I think the problem is that it's too costly, and I don't just mean in terms of dollars, for our Jewish community. That is to say, we spend a whole year training these kids, mostly to do something that they don't understand, that they don't care about. I'm not even sure the Jewish community needs them to care about, and that a year from then they won't care about. And I think that's too expensive.
So how do we fix it? How do we address that, Hanna?
Well, that's super radical. It never occurred to me that they don't care about it. What do you mean by that? It seems to me they study, they go to Hebrew school, most of them. Why is it that they don't care?
Well, let's take what most kids learn, which is a part of the prophetic book. Most of them don't understand it. I would dare say most of our audience doesn't understand it. Most of the tutors don't spend time trying to explain it. It's archaic Hebrew poetry, disembodied even from its historical context. And mostly what we're focusing on is getting them to chant it, right? in a language they don't understand, in a diacritical system of notes that they will not remember. Most of them memorize it.
I remember mine. Am I alone in that?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, no, Rachel, I maybe you remember it. Tell me, what was the name of the prophet? That was too long.
Prophet Vayesha?
No, that's your Torah portion, friend.
But isn't there something? I mean, isn't there
What
something
happens
just
when we have a rabbi on the show?
No, but to me, I totally hear what you're saying, and it's been a while since my bat mitzvah, and I don't have a 13-year-old.
Oh, not that many years.
It's
no.
just like 5 or 10. But what you learn. This is what you learn as a Jewish youth. You learn, first of all, that you're ascending from one place of life into another. So there's a sense of whether or not you actually are an adult. There's a sense that adulthood is coming and that you ought to be ready and engaged. And there's also just an engagement with tradition.
Agreed.
And even if I don't understand what my portion was about, I still remember the cadences, the familiarity of that music. Like, that's a powerful language on its own that I've retained.
I agree. And full disclosure, Rachel is Canadian, and I actually think they do it a lot better in Canada. I just want to...
I thought you were going to say, so she's not really Jewish.
No, she's really Jewish is actually the case there. But I think the problem is that if you take a child and you give that child 6 months to a year of private Jewish study, that's an extraordinary opportunity. When we want to think about the outcome that we want to achieve, which is a robust Jewish community, which is a child that feels that Judaism is really a place that's going to help them solve their life's problems, where they're going to go and feel nurtured and cared for, and that this is like, oh my God, this is a cool place to live in.
As soon as you bring in cool.
So you've just made a great defense of the bar and bat mitzvah. But and touched on what my issue is, which is cost, financial cost. So I think it is the moment when the divisions in the Jewish community are exposed. The social inequality, which is widening throughout America and widening in the Jewish community. And it is the moment when one part of the Jewish community can sometimes really quite embarrass. And I don't just mean by excessive display, but by making them feel bad because they can't give their children the kind of bar or bat mitzvah that perhaps their classmates are getting. So then that overshadows the whole wonderful Jewish learning aspect of it.
But what I'd like to propose is if there was real substance, real understandable substance and meaning to that, the process leading up to bar mitzvah. And by the way, some synagogues do this really well. I think I'm speaking very generally here.
Canadian synagogues?
I was actually once a rabbi in Toronto, just, full disclosure there.
Wow, we're going to have to excavate that after the show.
But if we did that better, it feels to me that desperate search that goes on for these parties might happen less. Maybe we would care less about the theme. Right? I used to tell my children the theme of what's my theme going to be? How about bat mitzvah?
Yeah.
Could that be the theme? I don't know.
I'd like my bone to pick are the mitzvah projects.
Oh yes,
which I think have taken on a life of their own. And I've 3 daughters. All were bat mitzvahed. All did mitzvah projects of a sort.
But I think it comes from, again, that place that the stuff that they're learning in the institution doesn't have any meaning. They're looking for meaning. So the next thing you know, they are working with a poverty-stricken village in Africa. Never mind, we're 15 minutes from poverty in New York, right? We're going to do this project. And of course, we're going to fly to Africa to see this village so that we can feel very connected to it. We're going to ask everybody not to give presents to us because we want them to make a charitable contribution. And then we're going to have a $250,000 party that night to celebrate with a video of us in Africa with the village, right? But the problem isn't any of that, as far as I can tell. I mean, that's all silly, but it also could profoundly affect that child's life in a really good way. I think the problem is that the muscles we're trying to develop in these kids are muscles of communal responsibility and acting collectively. And instead, the bar mitzvah is just one moment of me as an individual, even as an individual philanthropist.
But isn't it good to have, even if it is me, isn't it good to have the me forced to do the mitzvah project? It has the word mitzvah in the title, so they got to pick up something good.
What were you going to say is wrong with the mitzvah project? This is new to me.
I think it comes on at the wrong time. I actually think it should be one of the ways that you engage afterwards.
Because they're too young to understand
No,
it?
just because I think too many kids just drop out and too many parents let them. That their engagement with the Jewish community ends, as soon as they've written their
Jewish
thank you
graduation.
notes. And I think, I think they're fine. My kids did various things, soup kitchens and therapy dogs and, all the appropriate
Therapy
things.
dogs? Wait, that's different. Soup kitchens and therapy dogs are
right?
not the same.
But, different children. But, I think it would be much better if, first of all, it was connected to Jewish learning, and if it's something that followed the ceremony and the party.
What would you do, Joy? What would you do? Would you get rid of the party?
No, I have to say, my daughter was married last year. That party was one of the most significant moments of my life, I hope of hers as well. I actually think it's quite Jewish to celebrate. I think it's amazing, when you have all those people who love you and you love in the room together. So I'm not hostile to the party. What I'm interested in is an outcome that produces a robust Jewish community. And it feels to me like bar mitzvah is actually sabotaging that. And ironically, it's the only thing that non-Orthodox Judaism has intensified. Let's remember that bar mitzvah simply means you turn 13, right? In the
Devil's
Talmud,
advocate
it does
here?
not say all this stuff that happens.
Devil's advocate is, if you want the bar bat mitzvah to create Jewish community, and having a bar bat mitzvah entails having all of your Jewish friends come together to celebrate something Jewish and talk
That's
about
good.
Jewish things, doesn't that facilitate Jewish community?
Absolutely. And if the study that led up to it and the preparation that led up to it was actually deeply related to where that child was and where that child was going, and gave that child and family the skills and tools that they need to actually contribute to Jewish life and get something back from Jewish life, then I see bar mitzvah as an extraordinary liminal moment on the Jewish journey.
I think
Okay.
we both agree on that. Because I think that if you look at it as something that a Jewish child experiences as one of the formative things that they will take with them as they move forward, that they will eventually come to understand and be glad retroactively to have, I see value in that too.
So I'd like to just switch our focus a little bit here. Now that we've solved the bar and bat mitzvah
Yes.
crisis, maybe we
All
can get into something perhaps even more daunting, and that is the real serious changes in the way we constitute families and relate to work. There was just a study released by Pew that talked about a term, at least that's been new to me, breadwinner moms. This means mothers who are either single mothers or who are making more than their husbands or their partners. And for the first time that anybody can remember, now 40% of American households are headed by breadwinner moms. How revolutionary is this, Hanna?
It's extremely revolutionary. If you think about how long we've associated the word breadwinner with man, back to caveman days, basically. You have this idea that the man goes out and works and supports the family, and the woman takes care of, cave, house, McMansion, whatever the woman's taking care of. That's how the world is always divided. And now you have this new world where women are heading the families, and that changes so much. It changes how we think about families and how families are constituted. It changes how we think about power dynamics between men and women. It changes what we think about the workplace and what the workplace can do for families. So there's all sorts of things that it scrambles up in this country.
You wrote a book called The End of Men. Does this lead to the end of men?
No, it's like all wound up together. And I don't necessarily think it's a good thing. I mean, when you talked about the data, one important thing to realize is that it's divided into two social classes,
Very
like
much about-
everything else in America. And so you have...
And it's mostly single. I mean, it's about 62 or 63% of the breadwinner moms are single.
Yeah,
moms.
I mean, at one level, you're just talking about women who out-earn their husbands, and those are likely to be very elite families. You know, that's sort of $80,000 plus a year households. And at the other end, you're just talking about the fact that so many more people are single mothers, so many more children are just raised by their mothers, and those families are more poor and struggling. So these are two... This phenomenon looks very different depending on where you are in the social class.
But it does strike me that there is a commonality for both of these segments, and that is that we have a workplace and a school year and a society that doesn't at all align with this new reality in the family.
Yeah, I mean, that is, we, meaning America. And most
Yes.
parts of the Western world have very different kind of workplaces, and they have mandatory maternity leave and paid maternity leave, and in Sweden and other parts of Scandinavia, even paternity leave, and they have healthcare systems that make it easier to take care of your children, and of course they have daycare systems which make it easier to combine work and family. So we should always remember that we live in the outlier, not our model is not the norm.
Well, I think that's exactly right. And it does feel like there's a tremendous responsibility for Jewish organizations particularly to take this issue seriously, particularly around childcare and workplace issues, because if we mean it when we say that we care about families, then we have to support these families, even though, particularly for Jewish nonprofits, this is a very expensive commitment. But it's one we have to make.
We've certainly been writing a lot about this at the Forward, and there are a growing number of Jewish nonprofits that are at least having a formal family leave policy, but it's paltry compared to, I think, what we expect. And one of the things that I have felt, because to some degree I both believe in this but know what it's like to manage through it, I kind of help run a small business, it's hard. It's hard to do it. I mean, I'm all in favor of people taking maternity and paternity leave, except I don't have enough money to replace them, and so we just sort of have to absorb the work and do it ourselves. And this is where, at least I think, there has to be a role for government.
Well, here's the dilemma that I've been thinking about lately. So we all want to be Swedish, right? Like we all want to move to Sweden.
For many reasons.
Even more than we want to be Canadian.
I actually also lived in Sweden. That is actually not a joke.
I know, but none of us are blonde, really.
None of us, I know, because we're Jewish, we totally can't be Swedish, but we want to be Swedish.
Actually, there are Jews in Sweden, but that's, again, we'll talk about that later.
But my point is, so we yearn to be Swedish and have, a year maternity leave and everything that they have in Norway, Sweden, et cetera. Except that the most recent studies show that in Norway and Sweden, women do worse in the workplace. They are more likely to work part-time. There's more likely to be gender segregation. So there's like a weird price you pay for the government setting. I've only started to think about this recently because all my life I have found it embarrassing that I live in one of the two countries in the world that doesn't have paid maternity leave, right? The other one is like Botswana. I mean, it's really nobody in the world doesn't have paid maternity leave, so it's embarrassing. But then you have these countries that have extensive paid maternity leave and women don't work or don't work in the same jobs as men, or they tend to drop out of the workforce more quickly. So it's kind of a weird dilemma. I don't really know what we should want anymore. I've stopped wanting to be Swedish.
They have really good chocolate there.
Why does that happen?
Why does that happen? I think it's because it kind of reinforces this notion, this gender split, that it is the woman's job. So until you get to the next level, which is enforcing paternity leave, or like France actually worries about childcare more than they worry. So until you actually do it in a gender neutral way, as opposed to, you're like a criminal if you don't breastfeed for a year in Norway. I mean, here it's bad enough, but there it just reinforces this culture of extreme motherhood. I think that's what happens. And so the gender segregations become more stark rather than less stark. This is like a new
That's
thing
really
I'm thinking
fascinating,
about.
actually.
Yeah.
The one thing I do remember from Sweden is the fact that marriage was secondary. There are a lot of couples that live together. There's actually a name for your partner who you just live with. It's called a samba. And sambas get the same rights as married couples usually do. So much so that actually when my male roommate and I, who went to the ICE hotel, we got the samba discount on the airline.
Awesome.
Yes.
I keep waiting for elite Americans to stop getting married. Why doesn't it happen here? Why are Americans like the only Western industrialized country where we love marriage?
Because there are so many romantic comedies.
It's sitcoms.
So let's switch now to perhaps a more serious but also really important subject. I know everyone here is aware that a couple of weeks ago, Angelina Jolie announced in an op-ed at the New York Times, unfortunately, she couldn't quite get into the forward, so she went to the Times instead, and talked about having a voluntary double mastectomy because she is part of a family that has genes for very, very serious cancers. And now especially that she has emerged from her surgery, as beautiful as ever, there's renewed discussion about whether or not this kind of pretty radical act is important, whether she empowered other women to do so, or whether she's actually taking the idea of thinking that we can prevent bad things from happening to our bodies to a place that might not really be reasonable. Judith, I know you spend a lot of time thinking about the intersection of science and politics and policy and faith. Are we trying to prevent too much? What's going on here?
I think that Angelina Jolie did a really brave thing, and it's admirable. And I think she probably raised a lot of awareness, and I think that's a really good thing. There are women who need to do double mastectomy, and it's a good thing that she put such a positive face on it. And any one person making that decision doesn't represent anything, really. But do we have a culture in which we tend to overestimate risks and underthink or underanalyze probabilities of bad outcomes? Absolutely. Do we have a medical establishment that is afraid of being caught out, not recommending some procedure that could save somebody's life, that is financially incentivized to recommend procedures? And I don't mean to make doctors out to be cynical, but it's just a kind of, there's a sort of perfect storm of malpractice anxiety and a kind of need to keep generating those procedures that sort of leads to too many procedures. So I do think we're over cautious and over quick to fix.
But at what point does caution and reason intersect with the BRCA1 and 2 genes? Those are the genes that predispose women, usually Jewish women, to breast cancer and ovarian cancer. The rates are often something like 87%.
Well, that's the rate that she gave, but there are a lot of little articles that came and blog posts that came out here and there to say, those are very relative. They're calculated this way and that way. Maybe she had some factors we didn't hear about. But yeah, it's risky. I mean, the bigger risk, as she said actually in her article, is ovarian cancer.
Right.
It's actually really easy to monitor breast cancer. You can do sonograms as many sonograms as you like, and you run no risk to the breast tissue. And so it's very easy to monitor. What's hard to monitor is ovarian cancer. And what actually needs more awareness is ovarian cancer, because that's actually very easy to remove once you're done having your children. It's not a problem. So we need
but I think the issue
Jolie of
is
the
not
ovaries.
necessarily once you're done having your children. I think the issue can be that, if you have the gene, you can get tested when you're young, and so you're faced with this dilemma in, prior to your potentially your childbearing years, not childbearing as in you're 13, 14, you got your period, but childbearing as in, I'm in that sweet spot of in my 20s and my 30s when I'd want to have kids, and you have to make that decision.
I think
and
that's really
so
tough.
that's where, and there's been, Jessica Queller, who wrote the book Pretty Is What Changes, about her own disease, to her own having of those genes and her decision to have the double mastectomy and remove her ovaries. Wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal where she talked about how just having Angelina Jolie be visible was something that she didn't even have when she had to make that decision. She had nobody who had done it who could speak to having weighed the risks and actually had a life with, reconstructed breasts and feeling good about them afterwards.
Judith, I have a question for you. Are we spending enough money to solve this problem? Could we actually solve the breast cancer disease if we actually resourced it appropriately?
What do you mean by solve?
Cure. I mean,
We can't cure cancer yet.
Are we spending enough money, and is money the issue here?
I don't know exactly how much money we're spending. I wish I had those figures at my fingertips.
Doing a lot of walks.
But we definitely, it's one of your better funded cancers. It's way up there in terms of public awareness and funding. And the problem really isn't breast cancer. Increasingly, doctors are not thinking of cancers in terms of specific organs, but of specific kinds of cancers. And cancers with different genetic signatures, which can appear in all kinds of different parts of the body. So saying breast cancer or ovarian cancer, that we need to cure these before we cure lymphatic cancer or brain tumors or brain cancer.
Wrong way to think about it.
It's the wrong way to think about it.
And, I'll admit my bias here because I happen to be married to an oncologist who oversees research on drugs for to combat cancer.
Total ringer right here.
That's right. I picked up some by osmosis, and one of the things that we're not funding enough is basic research, because Judith's absolutely right. I mean, now people are thinking about cancer as a containable disease, almost like diabetes, like it's a chronic disease that you might be able to live with, and it can manifest itself in so many different ways. And what's been really cut back is government funding of the basic research in universities, for example, that can then lead to breakthroughs. And that's why it's private industry that's doing it, and that's why the costs go up.
NIH, even worse than universities.
Yeah.
Incredible cutbacks at NIH because
absolutely.
of the sequester.
So the controversy now is about awareness versus mass panic. Where are we spending the money? We're spending money to raise all this awareness that's creating a kind of panic. This was the argument in a recent New York Times Magazine cover story, when in fact there's all this knowledge which might lead you to believe, oh, I might have one of these cancers that's slow growing, the same way we understand about prostate cancer. But in fact, when you find out you have cancer, you sort of go into a panic. This is the sub-Angelina Jolie, not the clear cases, but the much less clear cases. And that's the worry, is do we just assume certain things? We hear the word cancer and we act, even though we don't need to.
And the other thing is that there are some things that we know really do enhance your chances of getting cancer. I mean, hate to say it, guys, but if you smoke cigarettes, you have a much higher chance of getting cancer.
Despite what Michael Douglas says.
That's right. And so, if we really, one way to deal with this would be to, just have a society that didn't indulge in behaviors that we know can harm you.
Well, there's a lot more than behaviors, though. Aside from genes and aside from behaviors, there's also all kinds of things in the environment that we have absolutely no chance as individuals of controlling. So, if we could get rid of bisphenol A and endocrine disruptors and, various pesticides in the environment, that would be great. But none of us can do that by making individual choices. So that's the problem.
I'm going to pick up the vibe here now and change the subject to something far more lighthearted. Let's talk about rape culture.
This is Canadian humor.
This is a serious topic, and we get into it here at the Salon. And there's been a weirdly renewed sense of controversy around rape-themed humor. There was recently a campaign by Women Action Media and the Everyday Sexism Project towards banding together to get Facebook to classify as offensive sort of rape humor sites. And I'll give an example of some of the humor. There were like a photo of a woman lying at the bottom of stairs, having fallen down the stairs, with the caption, "Next time, don't get pregnant." So that sort of thing, and things in that horrific vein. And they were successful in getting Facebook to classify that as offensive, as Facebook had previously classified, say, photos of breastfeeding. So, and there's also been a renewed controversy in comedy about when, in the intersection of humor and shock, where should someone draw the line? And Hanna, you wrote a piece for Slate about an example of this in The Onion, where The Onion sort of. Well, why don't you talk about it?
Yeah, so The Onion did a mock story about Chris Brown when he broke up with Rihanna, saying that it was done in the sort of tone of a Hollywood breakup tabloid voice, but it was about how Chris Brown hoped that Rihanna would be the woman he once choked to death, and that they could be together forever so he could choke her to death. And then there was. And it was perfectly executed, and it was, as I said, mimicking that kind of glossy, tabloidy breakup language. And some people thought it was over the line, like just really not funny, and some people thought it was obvious satire, which in fact made the point that Chris Brown was awful and that we all take rape culture too lightly. So it's almost like, which side of the joke did you fall down on? And since then, this is not dying. Like, we keep arguing over rape jokes. I frankly didn't know rape jokes were like a phenomenon. Maybe I don't go to enough comedy clubs. I mean, I remember there have been controversies with Louis C.K. and with Tosh, and Louis C.K. defending Tosh, but I thought it's just like pops up every once in a while. I didn't realize it was like a regular thing.
It seems to be a staple. Like, and sort of comedians, particularly male comedians, defend no right more vociferously than the right to make a rape joke.
Well, Amy Schumer, who's my new favorite comedian, who's on Comedy Central, she has a whole riff about how we've all been a little bit raped, and like women are starting to do it too. It's become this kind of bright line that you poke your audience with, and then the audience reacts in one way or another.
Have you ever watched Sarah Silverman make rape jokes?
Yes.
She makes all kinds of rape jokes. Nobody
I
objects
just
to
saw her
Sarah
live,
Silverman
yeah.
making rape jokes.
She is cited.
She is?
Yeah, well, I mean, the classic Sarah Silverman rape joke, and I am quoting Sarah Silverman, is she says, "I was raped by a doctor," which is so bittersweet for a Jewish girl.
Right.
Oh my God, that's right.
Right.
I've seen that. I forgot about that.
So we all know what the target is there. The target is Jewish, cultural mores.
But I have to ask: is this a question of sexism and insensitivity to women, or is this just like an example of bad taste?
Well, I think the comedian's creed is that nothing is off limits. I mean, there's a movie called The Aristocrats in which you tell this most vile joke, and you either tell it well or you don't. I mean, that's something that comedians believe in, just as defense lawyers believe that nobody is beneath a good defense, right? So they just believe that there are no lines you can't cross, and so that's the corner that they get backed into. And then the feminists believe that there's this sort of live rape culture that we all have a responsibility to combat.
But I think that's kind of a weak defense. I mean, just because there aren't any lines that you can't cross doesn't mean that you should. Doesn't mean that
or
it's
that you
funny.
do them well.
Yeah.
Right. So, Hanna, your wonderful piece made the point that the only defense of a joke is that it works.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it was perfectly obvious about that Chris Brown story that the person writing it was making fun of Chris Brown and was, that, I don't know if it was a he or she, because onion items are anonymous, but that person was, anti-rape culture. Mm-hmm. But it didn't, but some people just thought the very mention of it was over the line. So, and I've since moved my opinion a little bit.
To what?
I think just being funny maybe is not quite enough, Now that I've immersed myself, I'm like a historian of the rape joke now. So I I was forced to read every rape joke, and I was thinking, is it really just if they're funny? Because we don't make racist jokes, really. I mean, unless you're, a minority, you're like a white guy making black jokes would probably not come off well, right? So
Michael Richards found that out the hard way.
Yeah.
Oh, that is
if it's like a black guy
reference.
making black jokes, he can get away with it. So, whereas like Amy Schumer and Sarah Silverman, nobody's ever said that about her rape jokes. So a woman doing it is a different story. So clearly there are lines.
But it's contextual. That's the problem with making clear rules, and that's the problem Facebook faces, right? How do you make these clear rules? Every context is different. Who made the joke? How far did it go? And still, nonetheless, I do think it matters. Was it funny?
Right.
Joy, you look like you want to jump in.
It just strikes me that it doesn't matter what we think because you can't stop this, right? We really can't. As a society, I think we have made it uncomfortable for white people to make racist jokes. But it's not because there was some legislation on Facebook, I don't think. I think it's because as a society, we kind of don't let that happen. And if, as a society, we agree that rape jokes are actually not funny, then perhaps they'll stop being made because we just won't consider them funny. But I don't see how limiting First Amendment works.
Well, that's the argument of the campaign against Facebook. That's why we go, Facebook, if you think of Facebook as the great online community, the argument is that they have to police this. They're the place where the culture changes.
Well, what made the difference with Facebook was that people started pulling ads. So the campaign was to
fair.
Facebook, but also to advertisers.
But that's fair and square. That's part of the community discussion.
But another point is that it's about the public discussion. I guarantee you there are white people making racist jokes right now. And, even as we speak, somewhere a racist joke is being uttered. But it's a question of what is allowed in the public domain. So then the question becomes, how do you police the public domain? And I like your point that we just have to change our idea of what is acceptable in public. And we have to sort of police each other, is I think what you're implying.
Yeah, and I think actually it turns out if you police it in public, some of it, leaks into private too. Not all, but some.
So this gives you just some idea of the kind of conversation that we have on the Salon every time we gather. But tonight we're going to do something new, and that is invite you, the audience, to ask us some questions too.
That makes it like a salon.
That's right. Rachel's been waiting for years to say this.
My favorite joke ever, I'm sorry. Thank you, whoever laughed. Thank you so much.
All right, this is nice. The first questioner is a man.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if men were allowed at this thing to begin with.
Absolutely.
This is, goes to the issue of rape, but also the issue raised by the end of men, where we have sort of two simultaneous trends. We have women becoming more and more powerful in society, women ascending the salary scale, the managerial scale, the professional scale, and at the same time we have this increasing trend, rape jokes are in. Rape jokes are basically tearing women down, whether it's Sarah Silverman doing it or it's a man doing it. And so I wonder if there is some kind of connection going on.
That's interesting.
That is an excellent observation. I think there is some connection because there's an inevitable backlash to any giant cultural change, just as I'm sure you could have tracked racist jokes when, African Americans were getting rights or during the civil rights era. I'm sure it's something like that, where the more you have women in obvious positions of power, the more there's a resistance to that. I think you saw some of that in the last presidential election, where you suddenly had these incredibly retrograde, like not just pro-life issues, but contraception, all kinds of issues that you thought were long, well decided and closed suddenly pop up in this election because there's a resistance to that general trend.
I want to distinguish those Sarah Silverman making those jokes and the men making those jokes, because I actually think that Sarah Silverman being able to make those jokes, and I haven't heard Amy Schumer's, shows that actually women enjoy a kind of freedom to do this kind of triple ironic move, make fun of themselves, make fun of rape culture, and talk about rape openly like that. It's actually a sign of liberation. I don't mean to I think everything Hanna said is right. Otherwise,
you should write that story.
But I think what you both are getting at is that the target matters, and I think when rape is about power, right? The exercise of power, and Sarah Silverman isn't talking. That's not her target when she makes that joke. And I think that matters too.
Well, thank you. Yes.
Thank you so much for such a fascinating talk. I wanted to ask something about the issue of maternity leave that was brought up briefly. You were talking about Sweden, and I know in Italy there's also a 2-year paid maternity leave that's required, and as a result, employers, I won't say flat out won't, but are very hesitant to hire women of a childbearing age. And I'll make the potentially offensive generalization that Italy might be a more misogynistic culture than America, but could you see something like that happen if America were to someday, implement a plan like 2-year paid maternity leave required?
Yeah, so if I were the head of American Family Policy, if you all vote for me as the head of American Family Policy, I would skip over that phase for exactly that reason and move to the phase where you have mandated equal maternity and paternity leave, which I ragged on Sweden, but Sweden is actually the only country in the world that has forced paternity leave down men's throats and made it almost impossible not to take it for exactly this reason, so that, an employer doesn't think, I have to hire a woman, she's going to take a year off and then another year off off, that you think that about, like, he has to think, ugh, I'm going to hire a man, he's going to take a year off. So it just kind of equalizes the playing field.
I mean, in general, I don't think anything that's mandated is ever going to pass in America. So I actually think that what we need to do is offer more choice for people. There are some people who are ready to go back to work at 3 months or 8 months or whenever. I think that we need to be able to support families, and the childcare issue is the one that I think is so important there. I once did the crazy thing and hired a pregnant babysitter. And
That's crazy.
It was crazy, but you know what? It was okay. And the reason I did it is because a friend of mine who I looked up to a lot, she had done it, and she said, it's okay, you give them, I gave her some maternity leave, and then she brought her baby with her when she watched my kids, and you know what, it turned out just fine. And we have to have the guts to do that kind of stuff, and it's starting to happen. Look at Marissa Mayer, hired when she was pregnant. Yair Lapid, the new head of the Yesh Atid party in Israel, hired a woman who was, I think, 8 months pregnant with her third child to be one of his top people. And so, part of this is also we, as people with some degree of power, perhaps, also have to say we need to leave it up to men and women to make the decisions about how long they want to be at home to raise their kids.
Thank you.
Or a statement in a different vein. What about the older woman and the older Jewish woman in society? From the New York Times, which rarely has articles about older people. Sometimes Jane Brody will talk about it in Health. I don't see the older woman, and by that I mean even older than I, although I do feel ancient sometimes because I don't understand your references here. But I don't think that there is so much of a place for older people, and especially older women in Jewish and in the society at large. Older women are also still buds of humor, and hopefully all of you young women will get to age and experience little prejudices against you, from waiting in lines to other things. So I think it's an issue that really hasn't been discussed enough in Jewish life.
Well, thank you. Joy, I'm wondering if,
Well, my guess
especially
is
as an organization here,
You are quite right, and we are very acutely aware of the recent Jewish population study that showed that the largest demographic, the fastest growing group of Jews in New York City are people over the age of 70, right? The fastest, right? That's not true in Brooklyn, right? That's true in Manhattan. In Brooklyn, the fastest demographic is children between the ages of 3 and 5 or something like that. But I think all Jewish organizations are increasingly mindful, and here is the good news. The JCC just completed a 6-week study with a group of women that are looking at wise aging, and really, what does it mean to not only provide community and accessibility to Jewish women and Jewish men as they age, but how to get the very best from them. After all, and I now really have to say we, as we age, we have a lot to offer. And we need a community that can actually find ways to help us continue to feel productive and feel like we're giving. It's actually less, it turns out, so say the studies, about getting than it is about feeling like you still have purpose in your life and you can still give. So you should call me tomorrow.
Thank you for raising that. That was a very perceptive point, a bit of media criticism. And it's, again, by speaking up about stuff like that, that it helps us to recognize that maybe, we should be mindful about the references that we make and make sure that it's inclusive and that we're thinking about the entire community as well.
thank you. Yes.
So I'm a big fan of Tosh, probably the only one in my age demographic that's a woman. And no offense, Jane, but don't you think that we should have a bit more of a sense of humor sometimes? Because it does hurt feminism and women when there's like just blanket reactions to everything, rape jokes or whatever the jokes are?
Well, now, thanks to the previous speaker who opened the door, I can say I never heard of Tosh until tonight.
I've heard of Tosh. I can take this.
I'm not
It's
the right one
after
to
your
answer.
bedtime, Jane.
I know.
See, but the
There
thing,
it is.
but Tosh's joke, I mean, I don't watch that much Tosh, but I've watched Tosh and he's incredibly hilarious. But his joke wasn't funny. Like his rape joke, that's sort of the joke he got in trouble for. Like I as opposed to the one in The Onion, I found that one kind of like I didn't have anything to say about it because it just wasn't funny. He just like pointed to this woman in the audience and he was like, "I'm gonna rape her right now." It was like
he makes jokes every week now about it.
that's not that funny. But yeah.
I'm saying,
But then that led Louis C.K., who we all do respect because he is extremely thoughtful about all this stuff, to say like what you just said. What feminists can't take a joke, basically.
Which I think is a real misnomer. But I think that feminists often point out jokes that aren't funny, and often there's like in the Venn diagram of rape jokes and funny jokes, it's actually a really, really, really small overlap about the ones that are actually funny. Most of them are comedians trying to grapple with shock value, and they're doing it at open mics and trying to figure it out. I have seen Tosh. It is actually one of the shows that when I'm about to watch The Daily Show or my DVR automatically turns. Like if I see Tosh, I will leap for my remote to switch the channel because I dislike him so much. And I'll give you an example of one of the reasons is Tosh often exhorts his followers, his viewers, to do silly pranks. And one of the pranks was play a game called, gently reach out and touch a woman's stomach. And people and his viewers posted YouTube videos of them sneaking up on women and touching them in the stomach. And they thought it was hilarious. Not hilarious. Not hilarious and not particularly, I mean, clever either to incite your viewership to sneak up on women and touch them without invitation. So that's the sort of thing that I do see from Tosh. I recognize that, Comedy Central, they have the demographic and they feel like they have to pander to it, and I don't know how they think that the people who watch and enjoy The Daily Show and Colbert are somehow overlap with the people who watch Tosh. But as a feminist and someone who's worked in comedy, I don't feel that the two are inconsistent at all. I don't think you'd ever see Amy Poehler make that joke.
Yes, thank you. Next question.
Hi, my question is actually for the rabbi. The bat mitzvah tends to fall at an age where all of a sudden you're starting to realize everything going on around you. I'm not sure if I missed this during my bat mitzvah training, but is that on purpose? And if so, is there something that we should be picking up about that? And part B to that question is, do you remember my bat mitzvah theme, Mom?
I think I remember not allowing you to have a bat mitzvah theme, Ruthie.
Both my sister and I had bat mitzvah themes.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, this is what happens when you get to this old age that we were discussing. But I think your earlier point.
This was not planned, ladies and gentlemen.
No, she's coming here to see Rachel. But I think your earlier point is really true. All ancient societies have rites of passage that enable children to enter into what used to be called adulthood and is now called adolescence, right? And in ancient societies, they would typically give a young boy a spear and tell him to go kill a bear. And the good news about this was the kid felt potent, which is actually the psychodynamic process you want for a child, feel powerful, okay, sexually powerful, right? Like, I can do this thing. I can grow up. That's very important. And I'm not exactly sure Haftorah does exactly that. We could have that conversation.
The Torah's heavy.
The Torah, I actually think the Torah might do that. I think that's a very powerful experience, reading from a scroll, logging into the Jewish people. I'm all for that.
The yod and the spear, I'm getting.
There you go. Yeah. But here's the thing the point I really wanted to make. That kid needs to know how to kill a bear. He needs to do that because he needs to be able to eat. And his community needs him to be able to kill that bear. And what we need to do, because you're right, this is a very powerful liminal moment in a child's life. That child is becoming pubescent. And that child is becoming sexually active, which is, or potentially sexually active. and
Other child.
And that's also part of what this party thing is, right? It's deflected anxiety, right? We're terrified about what's really happening to our children, and so we're gonna deal with.
Or we're afraid they're not going to get married, so at least we could have a
Well,
party when they have their bat mitzvah.
I mean, why is it that we're putting bar mitzvah kids on chairs, right? Which is actually a wedding custom, right? But you see this happening in bar mitzvahs, and I think it's because parents are so anxious that maybe their kids aren't going to get married, and we better get them up on the chair now.
So maybe the bar and bat mitzvah training should be learning to become a ritual slaughterer.
Well, thank you so much. I really want to thank you, the audience, for joining us this evening. Please join me in thanking our guests, Judith Shulevitz, Rabbi Joy Levitt, Hanna Rosin, the absolutely awesome Rachel Sklar,
And the fabulous Jane Eisner.
from everyone here at the Jewish Channel. We hope you'll continue this conversation on our wonderful Women's Issues blog, the Sisterhood at forward.com. Please tune into the Jewish Channel for this and so many other salons. And Rachel, you get to say your favorite joke again.
Thank you for coming to the Salon.
Thank you.
Welcome to The Salon, the first and only television show devoted to showcasing the voices of Jewish women. Hosted by Jane Eisner, editor-in-chief of The Forward and Forward.com, with Rachel Sklar, founder of Change the Ratio and TheLi.st, and featuring women from across the spectrum of age, profession, and affiliation. It's all up for discussion at The Salon.
Being Jewish is expensive.
I grew up as a Jew first and then as a Canadian in a lot of ways.
He and his friends love to pick up Jewish women.
Do you have his number?
Do I necessarily want my daughter seeing an incredibly, suggestive advertisement?
Obviously I'm going to advocate for modesty, but there's a balance of feeling sexy and feeling good about yourself no matter what your body type.
It just shows how difficult it is for us to really see women's brains and bodies together.
I sent my children to single-sex schools to make sure that the little girl had an opportunity to be a mathematician or a scientist.
Someone had told me when I was younger that I would be doing something other than being a mother. I would have told them to stop smoking what they were smoking.
One of the most important things that I do as CEO of a nonprofit organization is I get rejected every single day I go to work.
Men are supposed to be titillated and confused and then somehow find out about breast cancer, but the link is very weak.
If it was men who were being underpaid, we wouldn't be discussing why it's happening because it would have stopped happening already.
Some of the people who are really against abortion are really for Israel.
This is something that was reserved to men for so many years because the price he paid was pregnancy.
I don't think they love their guns as much as they hate people like us coming and telling them that their way of life is wrong.
We've learned from this that no one is above the law and that women have control over their own bodies.
She emerges as a very serious, smart person.
Our feelings about something like same-sex marriage do change. They've changed a lot.
Over 24 episodes with 72 guests, we've covered it all. Watch The Salon only on the Jewish Channel.